Hi, my dearest family. Well, today we are going to be looking at the High Priestess Tarot card, which is number two. A few days ago, we looked at the Magician card and how it is connected with astrology. So today, I would like to show you how the High Priestess has got also the astrological symbols in the card. Remember, these are systems that are connected. So the High Priestess is often seen as the keeper of secrets in the tarot card, representing the intuitive, the subconscious, the unrevealed parts of the psyche. Now, in Western astrology, this card is almost universally tied to the moon. While the magician, the previous card that we spoke about, represents the active, more of the solar power of manifestation, the high priestess represents the receptive, lunar power of stillness. So, why the moon? Well, firstly, the moon governs our emotion, instincts, the night side of our consciousness. Just as the moon reflects the sun's light, the high priestess reflects internal wisdom rather than the external actions. So, on one hand, the moon is intuition and the subconscious. Moon rules the ebb and flow of tides, the inner world. It represents what we feel, but cannot always explain logically. Now, the high priestess, you can see it on the card. It sits between the pillars of duality, the light and the dark. She doesn't think through a problem, she knows it through her gut. Also, the moon represents mystery as well as the unseen. So, only half of the moon is ever visible from Earth, and it changes phases constantly. Now, when you look at the High Priestess card, she wears a veil and holds a scroll. The scroll is the Torah that is partly hidden, actually. So, this symbolizes that not all knowledge is meant for everyone. Some truth must be kept secret, or it has to be earned through silence and introspection. So, if I want to be kind of like looking at a career advice, for example, with the High Priestess, maybe it's someone, if someone asks about a potential business partnership and draws the High Priestess, then you can actually look at the moon's current phase and the person's natal moon phase or the position of the moon. But from a practical point of view, the facts on paper don't tell the whole story. That's what the card would represent. Like the moon, there is a dark side, a hidden factor you aren't seeing yet within that business partnership. So wait until you have a gut feeling before, for example, signing a contractual agreement. Don't rush into, you know, light of decision while things are still kind of like in the shadow. Or, if someone is feeling stuck and draws this card, this is kind of like the new moon phase of your life. Things are not necessarily clear around new moon. But the practical meaning of that would be that you are kind of like in a period of incubation. Just as the moon disappears before it grows again, you need to pull back from the world. This isn't the time for doing things, it's more of a time of being. So this is when you have to be paying attention to your dreams or certain type of symbols that might be actually popping up around you. So the high priestess energy is more passive, more receptive, and the moon is very emotional, very instinctive. Both of them are connected to the water element because the moon rules Cancer. And from an action point of view, the high priestess somehow represents stillness, a bit of a reflection, waiting at least in the corner for a couple of seconds before we make decision. And the moon represents fluctuation. So, with a goal perspective, the high priestess is always going to show certain type of a spiritual insight that we have to be gaining. Now, what do we see on this card? The high priestess sits between two pillars, one black with the letter B and one white with letter J. Actually, these represent the entrance of Solomon's temple. In astrology and Western Hermeticism, these aren't just archetypical figures, they represent the fundamental duality of the universe. The poles between which all life and pretty much planetary energy fluctuate. So when we look at that black pillar, that would be the representation of strength. Its energy is more passive, it's more mysterious, it represents the subconscious, kind of like the night side of life. And from an astrological point of view, it's a feminine receptive sign because moon is a cold and moist energy, which is the representation of earth and water. So, of course, what the moon does, it absorbs and reflect. It absorbs the light of the sun and then it makes a reflection of it. When you look at the white pillar, that's a little bit more about establishment. So that's the side which represents action, logic, consciousness, the day side of the life. So from an astrological point of view, it represents the masculine, the active signs, the fire and air signs, and the sun's ability to radiate and to project. So, imagine the high priestess is kind of like being a middle way. The most important part of this imagery is that she is not on one side or the other. She sits exactly in the middle. So imagine letter B, the pillar is more of a new moon, and that's still darkness, it represents the potentials, but the void where things are still hidden for us. And letter J is kind of like the full moon, the illumination, the peak of energy, things that are fully revealed for us around that time. So the priestess is somehow the bridge between the new moon and the full moon energy. She teaches that wisdom comes from balancing logic and intuition. So if you are receiving this card, for example, in a reading, imagine that there is a conflict in relationship. Maybe it might represent that your client or yourself is pretty much torn between safety, for example, and certain type of like excitement within the partnership. So am I gonna go with an exciting partner or am I gonna stay in this safe but potentially kind of like dull relationship? So drawing the high priestess suggests that neither extreme is the answer because we have got that B and J, which remind us or the client that you are currently kind of like between two poles. So the solution is somehow to find a middle pillar there, the space where you feel emotionally centered rather than reactive to either extreme decisions. So the other thing that, she is sitting in front of a veil covered in pomegranates. So she's essentially guarding the entrance to the deeper mysteries of the natal chart. So what's very also interesting from an astrological point of view, when you think of the moon is exalted in the sign of Taurus, which is an earth sign. But moon has got planetary joy in the third house. So this is a tension that the high priestess mediates. The ground of the physical world, the logic in a way, which is very Taurus-like, versus the mind of that immediate environment and communication. Moon's task is eventually to be able to express feelings. So here we don't exactly know in the card of High Priestess how to express those feelings because we are navigating between them two. So her sitting between two pillars, it explains why she's so still. She is the point where the physical body and the mental perception try to merge into intuition. So, when Moon is in the sign of Taurus, the Moon is at its most stable position. She isn't just about feelings, it's more about a physical instinct. So the connection here is that moon in kind of Taurus represents the black pillar there, the heavy, the material, the deep strength of the earth. And also it potentially represents practicality as well, because the high priestess knows that the true intuition isn't kind of airy-fairy. It's rooted in the body. We're just going to have to listen to the body. It's that gut feeling, right? That tells you when a situation is safe or dangerous before your brain actually can process it. Now, the moon has got planetary joy in the third house. That's the mental pillar there. So, um, it's where the third house is where we translate our environment into symbols, language, the local knowledge. You might be wondering why the third house, but if you think of the ninth house and the planetary joy placement there is the sun. It's a little bit like Apollo, for example, who was about divination. The wife of Apollo is the moon, so the sun's wife um, is the moon. So that's the reason why the moon belongs to that third house. And she needs to be able to translate those godly messages. So here, the moon is pretty much representing the white pillar, the establishment of the thoughts, names, the conscious mind's attempt to potentially categorize the world. Remember, the High Priestess holds a scroll. So this is the third house element, the literal world, the mind that reads it. But notice, she isn't reading it, she's just holding it. So she has integrated the information into her being already. Most likely, she has read through that particular book. So it again represents the High Priestess as a bridge between two states. If she were only Taurus, she would be an Empress, purely fertile and physical. If she were only the third house, the joy placement of it, she would be a scholar or she would become a messenger. But she is both. She represents the subconscious intelligence. So again, if you receive this card in a reading, for example, maybe actually you either, use the Taurus side. Let's say oh, I need to eat, I need to sleep, I need to feel secure. If maybe it represents the third house side of it. Oh, I need books, I need logic, I need communication, I need to talk about it. So the High Priestess is somehow reminding you that it's not just about memorizing the text, and not just about sitting in silence. You must embody the knowledge. She is telling the student to listen how the information feels in their body. If the mind and the ground don't align, the secret remains hidden. It won't be revealed to you. Now, behind the High Priestess, she's draped between two pillars, is a veil. The veil is decorated with pomegranates and palm leaves. So in Western tradition, this isn't just a decorative backdrop, actually. It's more about the boundary and the map of a planetary energy. So the pomegranates is pretty much ruled by Pluto or Scorpio. So it somehow brings in the eighth house energy as well as fertility. So they represent seeds of the underworld, therefore hidden wealth, deep transformation, and the mystery of life and death, basically. Just as the eighth house deals with other people's resources, the secrets we keep, the pomegranates show that the high priestess guards a fertile hidden world. So if you look at the deck closely, the pomegranates are very much arranged in the shape of the tree of life. This suggests that the grounded world of Taurus we discussed earlier is actually supported by this very complex, hidden kind of spiritual structure. Now you see palm leaves as well, which is a little bit like the ninth house. It represents the higher low. Why the pomegranates represents the low and the earthy side of things, the palm leaves reach upward. So palms are traditionally associated with victory, but in spiritual sense, they represent the ninth house, the higher learning, philosophy, the expansion of the soul. So again, this represents that shift from the third house, the planetary joy, where you collect the facts, to that ninth house, where we are making a universal truth out of it. Again, it's another balance. The palms, which is more masculine, more upward, and the pomegranates, which is a little bit more feminine and contained, together create this kind of balanced curtain that keeps the uninitiated out of the sanctuary. So again, if you get this card, maybe a client asks you a very basic question like, will I get this job? And the high priestess appears, let's say maybe the focus is going to be on the veil. Then it means that the answer is behind the curtain. Maybe currently you are looking at the pomegranates, the physical reward of the seeds, but you aren't looking at the palms, which is the higher purpose, the long-term growth in that job. So you might be asked with this card to look past the surface, level facts of the job, and see if it aligns with your internal law. Or maybe in a session uh, about a personal trauma or a deep memory, then this card would indicate that that veil acts like a protective barrier. Just because the pomegranates are there doesn't mean you have to eat them. It doesn't mean that you have to dive into the trauma yet. So the high priestess says the information is fertile and ready, but you must be invited in. It suggests that the potentially you need to respect your own boundaries before doing pretty much the eighth house work. Are you ready to do that? I think the veil tells us that the mind and the ground are just the beginning. Behind her is kind of like the vast ocean of the collective consciousness. So, what's also very interesting about this, that the moon has got detrimental position in Scorpio, which is the eighth sign. So you can think of it as, because it's detrimental, it's hidden. It has got that layer of weight and heaviness to the high priestess that people often overlook when they focus on her serenity. So when the moon is in Scorpio, it's in detrimental position. We call it fall. In Taurus, the moon is comfortable because it has got physical security. But in Scorpio, the moon is burdened because it has to deal with the raw, unfiltered, often dark truth of your human experiences. So there is that burden of the pomegranate, right? Pomegranate represents fertility, but they are also the fruit of the underworld. It was the fruit of Proserpina or Persephone. So to eat them is to be bound to the secret world. It's the weight of knowing. So the high priestess sits perfectly still because she is carrying the weight of all that knowledge that she knows. And maybe she is in a bit of a confessional state. She holds the secret that others are too afraid to face. So often it's going to be appearing for you as kind of like a card reader as well, that the person might not be ready just yet, especially if it's a downward position. The person might not be ready to get to know the real truth. So just be very careful with them. Scorpio is a fixed water sign. It's the ice. It's like a deep well. So on the surface, it looks frozen or calm, but underneath, that pressure is super immense. So I think this card explains this expression pretty well. She doesn't look too happy. She's just contained there. So she represents the ability to hold still, to hold intense ape house emotional data without being destroyed by it. So therefore, there is a lot of strength there as well. So if a client is struggling with a family secret or a taboo situation and draws this card, then it means that you are actually carrying the Scorpio's moon burden. Like the High Priestess, you are the keeper of information. It feels super heavy, even it could be toxic as well. And the lesson here is containment. You don't have to shout the secret, but you must acknowledge its power so that it doesn't erode you from the inside. Or maybe someone who has got a healing profession, for example, maybe an astrologer or a therapist, draws this card. That this card shows, one hand on the reality of your work, because you are sitting between pillars of people's life. And, the pomegranate behind you represents the eighth house trauma you hear daily. And to stay in joy, you must keep the veil closed. Don't take that burden into your personal kind of sanctuary because it might start kind of like eating you from inside. So the High Priestess reminds us that the moon in Scorpio is only a detriment if you try to treat it like a Taurus moon. If you try to make a secret comfortable, you fail. The High Priestess succeeds because she accepts that some truths are heavy and she chooses to be strong, silent, kind of like a silent container for them. She is kind of wearing a helmet. Did you notice that? Well, this is not really a helmet. It's called the Triple Goddess Crown. And it consists of a full moon, uh, flanked by two crescent moons, which is going to represent the waning and the waxing phases of the moon. So, it's a crown, but it's kind of like a satellite dish. So, it's where she receives the data. The center of it is the full moon, so that's the peak of the consciousness. And the crescent, the sides, basically, representation of the waxing and the waning phases of the moon. So this is the Scorpio eighth house cycle of birth, death, shedding, rebirth process. She isn't just wearing a hat. Actually, it means that she's kind of wearing the entire cycle of time. She knows that everything are based on phases. Everything is rhythmical. It's kind of like, what comes around goes around. So, you can look at it as a helmet or you can look at it as a crown. Well, if we look at it as a helmet is for protection. So a crown is more of a representation that I'm a higher status in a way. So when you are dealing with the burden of secrets, you need protection for the crown chakra. So that helmet suggests that her mind is shielded. She's filtering that intense eighth house noises, the fear, the the inner demons, the inner saboteur, through the phases of the moon. So she doesn't let the secrets hit her all at once. She processes them through the natural timing of, lunar cycle. So therefore, often High Priestess might be representation of lunations or kind of like a 28-day cycle. You also see a solar cross on her chest. So to balance the helmet, she has a large equal armed cross on her chest. It actually would represent the four elements: fire, air, earth, and water, and the four cardinal points of the chart. So the ascendant, descendant, midheaven, and the IC. So because the helmet, the crown, is busy processing the shifting phases of the moon, the cross on her chest keeps her anchored in the physical world. So again, maybe it pops up in a reading when the client is trying to rush a process. So it might show certain type of impatient. So maybe then we have to be looking at the crown. It shows that full cycle, the waxing, full, and waning moon phases. So it might show that you are currently in a crescent phase. You cannot force the full moon result yet. Like her helmet, you need to protect your ideas while they are still growing. Or, maybe imagine that we have got a child. And maybe it pops up in a child's chart because the child is feeling kind of fried from too much deep study or eighth house work. So it might represent that we have to be putting on the priestess helmet. Maybe there is maybe this child is letting the information hit them emotionally somehow. So maybe we need to use the moon phases to schedule their work. So also from a numerological point of view, this is card two. And I think it's a perfect number because in numerology and astrology as well, two is the number of duality, reflection, partnership as well. But it's also the first step away from number one. So if the magician is number one, which kind of represents, an individual spark, the high priestess is number two, the moon, the line, the relationship between 2 points. So number two is where we first encounter the other. You cannot have a secret, a reflection or a burden without a second point of reference. So this is somehow also the mirror, and moon represents reflection. Moon is the planet of mirrors. So what it also tells you that on one hand it's me, and secondly, I'm being reflected in the mirror, in the lens of others. So number two represents the subconscious because the subconscious is a second mind that mirrors our conscious actions. It is about being aware who I am surrounded by. This is also the reason why the High Priestess card has got two pillars. You cannot have the white pillar without the black pillar. So maybe it pops up in a decision-making scenario in your chart. Then maybe you have to be choosing between two paths. And the number two tells you that you are caught kind of like in a binary. You think it's this or that. But the high priestess says, what if I have chosen both of them? Because I'm sitting between two pillars, equal distance. Or maybe it suggests a third way. Don't choose just yet, because something else is going to be coming up, and therefore we might need to be doing a reflection. Or maybe you are pulling or drawing this card in a relationship scenario. Maybe it says that the relationship has gotten to a phase where we have to do a lot of reflection. We have to be looking at the shadow side of ourselves as well as the partnership. Maybe it's asking you to see something in the other person, or see that the person is reflecting something within you, maybe a deep traumatic experience of yours. So, guys, do let me know if these kind of like colorations are helping you with your tarot card readings, as well as even with your astrological readings as well. And at the same time, if you would like to study with me, then I've got a membership program. And within that membership, you can choose among 250 courses and webinars all together, where I give you a really detailed explanation of astrological configurations, planetary positions. And you can expect explanations like this, a lot of hidden connections that you might not be able to read online or even hear from others. So thank you very much for being here, and I will see you in my next video. Take care. Bye bye.